February 1966, Daytona International Speedway. A sleek silver Dodge Charger screams across the finish line at 175 miles per hour, leaving Ford and Chevrolet engineers scrambling for explanations. Under that fastback hood sat America's most feared engine, the 426 HEMI, in its first street-legal incarnation. But this wasn't just another muscle car debut. This was Chrysler's declaration of war on Detroit, a calculated assault that would rewrite the rules of American performance forever. Tonight, the real story behind Dodge's ultimate weapon and the corporate gamble that almost destroyed the company while creating automotive legend. The war context. By 1965, Chrysler was the laughingstock of American racing. Ford's 427s were dominating NASCAR tracks with mechanical precision, while GM's big blocks ruled the streets with brutal efficiency. Chrysler's aging 383 and 440 engines were respectable workhorses, but respectable doesn't win Daytona or fill showrooms with teenage buyers clutching their parents' money. The muscle car revolution was exploding across America like a cultural wildfire. Every weekend, kids were lining up at drag strips to see which manufacturer built the fastest, loudest, most outrageous performance machine. Horsepower was the new currency of cool, and Chrysler was bankrupt. Corporate executives in Highland Park were watching their performance reputation crumble in real time. Plymouth Barracudas couldn't touch Mustangs in sales. Dodge Coronets were getting embarrassed by Chevelles at every traffic light. The company that had pioneered hemispherical combustion chambers in the 1950s was now playing catch-up to their own forgotten innovations. But behind closed doors in Chrysler's engineering fortress, a small team of obsessed gearheads was plotting the most audacious comeback in automotive history. They weren't just building an engine, they were crafting automotive vengeance, a mechanical middle finger to everyone who had counted Chrysler out. The mission was simple in concept, devastating in execution. Take the race-only 426 HEMI that had terrorized NASCAR tracks in 1964 and 1965, make it street legal, and stuff it into every performance car Dodge and Plymouth could build. The result would either save Chrysler's performance credibility or destroy the company trying. The mad scientists enter Tom Hoover, Chrysler's chief engineer and the quiet mastermind behind some of America's most legendary power plants. A soft-spoken genius with an obsession for hemispherical combustion chambers, Hoover had been dreaming of street Hemis since the 1950s. His notebook was filled with sketches, calculations, and fever dreams of automotive domination. Working alongside him was Dick Maxwell, Chrysler's performance development specialist and track warrior. While Hoover designed perfection on paper, Maxwell made it scream on asphalt and survive on city streets. Together, they formed Chrysler's secret weapon development team. Their laboratory was Chrysler's engineering building in Highland Park, a modernist temple of chrome and glass where the most exotic engines were born. Away from corporate bean counters and federal regulators, this became ground zero for Chrysler's most ambitious project yet. The challenge was absolutely brutal. Take a race engine designed for maximum power and minimum compromise, then make it streetable enough for soccer moms while maintaining enough savagery to obliterate Ford's finest. It had to pass emissions testing, survive traffic jams, and still terrorize drag strips on weekends. The race HEMI had been pure violence, tuned for maximum power with no regard for street manners. Massive camshafts, wild compression ratios, and fuel consumption that would bankrupt normal families. Making it civilized enough for showrooms would require engineering miracles and compromises that could kill its performance edge. But Hoover and Maxwell weren't interested in compromises. They wanted to build the ultimate street fighter, an engine so devastatingly powerful that competitors would question their own sanity while trying to keep up. The Beast Unleashed. The foundation of Chrysler's monster was the legendary 426 cubic inch block, cast from iron so thick it could survive nuclear warfare. But this wasn't just a bored-out version of existing engines. Every dimension was calculated for maximum strength, from the deep skirt construction to the cross-bolted main bearing caps that could handle forces approaching the theoretical limits of cast iron. The real magic lived in those hemispherical combustion chambers that gave the engine its name. Unlike conventional wedge-shaped chambers, The HEMI's dome design allowed for massive valves positioned opposite each other like artillery pieces. Intake valves measured 2.25 inches across, while exhausts stretched 1.94 inches, creating breathing capacity that defied physics and common sense. The heads themselves were works of mechanical art, each one requiring over 40 separate machining operations to complete. The valve angles created perfect airflow characteristics, but demanded complex rocker arm assemblies that looked more like precision instruments than automotive components. This wasn't just advanced engineering, it was automotive aerospace technology disguised as a street engine. Compression ratios of 10.25 to 1 were moderate by race standards, but extreme for street use. Combined with a hydraulic camshaft designed for broad power band delivery, the street HEMI produced a claimed 425 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and 490 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. But dyno sheets whispered of numbers approaching 500 horsepower in optimal conditions. The track terror. When the first HEMI Chargers hit the streets in early 1966, drag strips across America became graveyards for automotive egos. Quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range were common, with perfectly tuned examples dipping into the 12s with ease. These weren't purpose-built race cars. They were street-legal predators that could embarrass anything Detroit had previously produced. Top speeds approaching 140 miles per hour made highway patrol officers nervous and insurance companies furious. The HEMI Charger wasn't just fast, it was devastatingly, intoxicatingly quick in ways that redefined American performance expectations. Acceleration from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds was supercar territory, achieved by a car you could buy at any Dodge dealer. NASCAR testing revealed even more terrifying numbers. HEMI-powered Chargers were clocking lap speeds that made Ford and GM engineers demand rule changes. The combination of aerodynamic fastback styling and brute HEMI power was creating speeds that threatened to make other manufacturers obsolete overnight. But the real terror came at street level. Every stoplight became a potential humiliation for anyone brave enough to challenge a HEMI Charger. The engine's distinctive sound, a deep rumble that built to a mechanical roar, became the soundtrack of American performance dominance. Street racers quickly learned to identify HEMI cars by their exhaust note alone. That unique sound meant serious trouble was coming, followed by taillights disappearing into the distance while lesser engines wheezed helplessly behind. The problem was becoming clear to Chrysler executives. They had created the ultimate performance machine, but at what cost? Insurance rates were skyrocketing, federal regulators were circling, and every HEMI sold was a potential public relations nightmare waiting to happen. The corporate gamble Chrysler's decision to produce the street HEMI was the biggest financial gamble in company history. Each engine cost nearly $2,000 to manufacture in 1966 dollars, equivalent to over $15,000 today. That meant selling HEMI cars at break-even prices or absorbing massive losses on every unit to maintain competitive pricing. Production numbers tell the real story of Chrysler's desperation. Only 468 HEMI Chargers were built in 1966, making them instantly rare and exponentially expensive. Each one represented a corporate loss that accountants could barely stomach, but executives understood the alternative was worse. The insurance industry was going nuclear over HEMI performance. Companies that had gladly covered muscle cars were now treating HEMI engines like automotive weapons of mass destruction. Premiums were doubling and tripling overnight, pricing young buyers out of the market entirely. Federal safety regulators were beginning to circle like vultures over high-performance cars. Emissions standards were coming, safety regulations were tightening, and politicians were making speeches about death machines on public roads. The HEMI's days were numbered from the moment production began. Internal Chrysler politics were equally brutal. Conservative executives argued that HEMI development costs were bleeding the company dry while creating liability nightmares. Every teenage driver wrapping a HEMI Charger around a tree could cost millions in lawsuits and decades of bad publicity. The death and legacy. By 1971, the perfect storm had arrived to kill Chrysler's HEMI dreams. Insurance companies were refusing to cover high-performance cars at any price. Federal emissions regulations made exotic engines virtually impossible to certify. The muscle car era was ending not with mechanical failure, but with bureaucratic strangulation. Chrysler's final HEMI production run in 1971 produced just 356 engines, a pathetic number that represented the end of American performance innocence. The company that had created the ultimate street engine was forced to abandon it just as perfection was being achieved. The tragic irony was overwhelming. HEMI engines had accomplished everything Chrysler had hoped, creating performance credibility that lasted decades beyond production. But success came too late to save the program from external forces that no amount of horsepower could overcome. What remained were the legends. Stories of HEMI Chargers embarrassing Corvettes, humiliating Mustangs, and terrorizing anything brave enough to challenge them. The reputation built in 5 short years would define Chrysler's performance image for the next 50 years. Resurrection and modern legacy. Modern Chrysler has spent decades trying to recapture the HEMI magic with varying degrees of success. The current 6.2-liter supercharged HEMI produces over 700 horsepower, numbers that would have seemed impossible in 1966. But something essential was lost in translation, a raw mechanical honesty that modern electronics can't replicate. The original 426 HEMI represented pure automotive courage, a willingness to build the ultimate performance engine regardless of cost or consequences. It was engineering without compromise, designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts in an era when such purity was still possible. Today's HEMI engines are marvels of technology, but they're also products of committees, regulations, and corporate risk management. They're fast, reliable, and efficient, but they lack the dangerous edge that made the original HEMI legendary. In an era of electric vehicles and autonomous driving, the HEMI Charger stands as a monument to automotive passion, a reminder of when horsepower was king and engineers were willing to risk everything for the perfect quarter-mile time. Drop your take in the comments. Was the 426 HEMI Charger the greatest American muscle car ever built, or just the most overhyped? And what would you give to own one of those 468 original 1966 models today?